This is episode number 120 of the Guns Magazine podcast. Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent Wheat. Thanks for joining us as we talk to the interesting folks who make up the world of shooting, hunting, and the firearms industry. But first, before we get started, let's have a quick chat about our sponsor, Luth-AR. Luth-AR is home of the MBA buttstocks, which are affordable, lightweight, fully adjustable buttstocks for AR-15 fixed and collapsible rifles. But that's not all. Luth-AR is your one-stop shop for build kits, replacement parts, and custom accessories including the chubby grip, palm handguards, oversized switch safety, and paddle bolt catch. Luth-AR is proudly made in the USA and with 4 decades of experience will continue their mission of innovate to dominate with high-quality products for your ARs. Find out more at luthar.com. Today is the first part of a 2-part episode focusing on dealing with the aftermath of a shooting. I talked with an old friend of mine and former co-worker, Tyson Warmoth, who's been involved in 2 police action shootings, including one involving a cop killer. I know lots of people who've been involved in shootings, but I've known Tyson for decades and felt like the two of us could comfortably discuss his inner dialogue, feelings, and recollections after the gunfire stopped. It's equal parts funny, sad, and informative, but I hope it sheds a little insight on what it's like when you pull the trigger on another human. Now, here's my talk with Tyson Warmoth. Good morning, Tyson.
Good morning.
Well, thanks for joining us. I think this is going to be a very special podcast episode. We started as baby cops a long time ago together, and you are still on the job. I have retired, of course, but the reason we're talking today is you have been involved in a couple of police action shootings in your career, and we all know a lot of folks who have likewise done the same, but I felt like of all the people I know, you're probably the guy that I can talk to the most and really get down into the stuff that is sometimes pretty uncomfortable. And we've talked about these situations a lot in our lives, but I feel like you tell your story very well. And I thought today we'll talk about that, and we're not going to focus on what you did so much as how it happened and how you felt and the aftermath, with the idea that maybe we can help some folks understand what the process is like, and if they're ever in the same situation, they can understand. So I appreciate you taking the time, and I know some of this is probably going to go places you don't like to even think about sometimes, but we were talking before we started to record, and you said that, you know, it's been long enough that you go some days sometimes without thinking about these situations, but how often does this come up in your head?
You know, my first shooting was in 2004. The second one was in 2018. And, you know, the day of the shooting, you're playing that episode in your head almost constant. And the next day, it's almost constant. And the third day, it's almost constant. You know, as the investigation, as you go through the investigation. And the longer you go, you know, you'll start thinking about it less and less. You know, you might think about it a week after. It might occur to you 25 times a day. You're reliving it. And as the time goes, as the days pass, the weeks pass, the months pass, you start thinking about it less. And now I think I'm at the point now in my life, in my career. Again, one happened in 2004. The other happened in 2018. And, you know, I go months, I think, sometimes without thinking about it. Again, unless we're in a small city, so unfortunately, you have to pass that area on patrol where it happened. And you know, it's coming up on the 4th anniversary of the 2018 shooting, and I have yet to go back into that apartment complex. And I'm not sure. I can't even tell you why I haven't, or why I don't want to. It's just I don't want to. And when I'm on an adjacent street, passing by that apartment complex, I have a tendency not to even look that way.
Yeah.
And again, if I do glance over there, again, I relive it.
Sure.
But it's not something that I carry with me every single day now, or I go weeks, you know. I have I have a great life. I have a great family. You know, I have a granddaughter now, so I'm so absorbed.
Grandkids are great.
Yeah, I'm so absorbed in my own life now that was just an unfortunate events that happened to me.
Yeah. So let's get into the first one. It was a situation where you had chased a young man, and it came down to confronting him in a very rural area that actually I go fishing there quite a bit. It's out in the middle of nowhere, but I wasn't on scene, but I heard everything going down on the radio, and I knew something bad had happened. But since we were out of our county, we were at the next county over, so that's where everybody met at the jail there, and we began the process of going through it. And I'll tell you, I remember you were so upset, not by the shooting, but the fact that you kept going to the bathroom every 30 seconds.
The one thing they don't tell you about a police action shooting is the explosive diarrhea you're going to suffer shortly after.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine. I didn't eat that much the night before. I didn't know where this was all coming from. And you're right. You got to listen to it on the radio because, well, you were a lieutenant and I was a patrolman, and you got to work days and I had to work nights.
Well, there's that.
So it was right there at shift change. But I guess the Reader's Digest version is a young man in our community decided that he wanted the police to shoot him, what they found out later. And so he just went up and down our main strip at 80 mile an hour in a 30 mile an hour zone until he caught one of our fellow officers' interest. And a pursuit began, and it led into 2 different counties and went into a very rural area where a rural sheriff's department threw some spike strips out, took his tires out, and then he kind of rolled down to a ditch off the interstate and bailed out and basically ran into the darkness. This was in December. And I still remember the temperature was right around 18 degrees that morning with about a 15 to 20 mile an hour wind. So I have no clue what that would be with wind chill.
And to set the scene, we working in northern Indiana, and in December, every single field has been plowed generally. All we do here is we grow corn and we grow soybeans. So
basically it's a barren tundra.
It's a barren tundra.
With not much cover or anything like that. And as the individual exited his car, he came out with a Bowie knife, a very long-bladed Bowie knife, and what appeared to me to be a 6-inch Dan Wesson 357.
Mm-hmm. And you're a gun guy.
I'm a gun guy, and I said, yep, that's a Dan Wesson 357, 6-inch barrel. I can tell from here. Yeah. And I retrieved my AR-15, which was my own personal AR I was carrying in the trunk. And the individual jumped a fence and basically ran into the darkness. Mm-hmm. No stars out, no moon. It was just basically dark.
Yeah.
And I saw another officer, the captain, the OIC at the scene, jump over the fence and go after him. And I'm like, well, I can't leave him on his own.
Yeah.
So I remember going over the fence, and I could barely see the suspect. I could barely see my captain. And they were running across this field, and I knew he had a gun. And the only thing I remember, the thoughts that occurred to me is that, okay, if I see muzzle flashes, drop to the ground, aim for the muzzle flashes, pull the trigger. That's what kept going through my head. Drop to the ground, aim at the muzzle flashes, pull the trigger. And we chased him across this field up onto a local state highway. And that's where it continued from there. He slowed to a walking pace. The captain, God rest his soul, he's no longer with us, was doing his best to negotiate with the young man, trying to get him to put the gun down. The young man kept screaming, I'm the devil, I'm the devil, I'm a meth head, shoot me, kill me, or I'm going to kill you. And I remember yelling at the captain to get back, you're too close, get away from him.
And also, I mean, he put himself in harm's way because he didn't want, everybody says the police were so trigger happy and we love to shoot people. He put himself in harm's way to avoid shooting this young man.
He never even drew his gun.
Yeah.
He wanted to negotiate. He wanted to save this young man's life any way he can. And there were several times that he would point that 357 at the captain, and I would bring my rifle up to bear and get ready to press the trigger, and then he would lower the gun. And this continued all the way down the highway to a county road. And then I remember him walking down the road, and by then another local department came on scene and lit him up with headlights. And we were joined by other officers. And several times he would point the gun at the captain. And I would raise my gun and get ready to shoot, then he would lower it. And, I was about 30 yards from him and off at an angle, about a 45-degree angle, kind of paralleling everyone. I was in the field. And there was another officer, a fellow SWAT team member with me on the other side of the local PD's patrol car, also with a rifle. And you could tell everything was ramping up. This young man was getting more and more excited, screaming, kill me, why won't you kill me? Then he would stab himself. He would, draw the blade across his arms, cutting himself. He would bring the gun up. I would bring my gun up. He would lower it. And then finally, an officer at the scene yelled, when he raises the gun again, green light, green light, green light. And I had that holy shit moment.
Yeah.
Is this really, really occurring?
Yeah.
Now, I'd been a police officer. Again, this was 2004. I'd been a police officer for 15, 16 years.
Yeah,
then.
you were very experienced.
And I'm like, this is going to happen, I think. And the young man heard that when they yelled green light, green light, green light. And he stopped and he just kind of looked down at the ground. And the captain was actually inching. He was within about 7 yards of him. He was actually going to try to rush him and grab the gun.
And again, nothing against anyone, but that was probably pretty inadvisable.
Yeah. And I remember screaming at him, get back, get back. And at one point I even yelled, I don't want to have to tell your wife you're dead. And I don't know, and you have to forgive me because that's the emotional part for me.
Sure.
I don't know why it even occurred to me that would have been my role.
Right.
But all I could think of is I'm going to have to go to his wife and tell him he's dead. And the young man, he just kind of looked down to the ground. And he held his gun down to the side. And I thought, wait. Okay, he's going to drop it. We're going to end this. And then I remember him looking up at the captain and said, would you promise me something? And the captain said, son, I will promise you anything. Just put that gun down.
Yeah.
And he kind of shook his head no, and he looked straight at the captain. He goes, promise me that you'll tell my mother I love her.
Mm.
And at that point, he raised the gun. I raised my rifle. The other officer raised his rifle. And I heard 2 finger snaps. Yeah. And that's exactly what it sounds, someone snapping their finger. That was the other officer's rifle going off and my rifle going off.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard the captain scream as I saw the young man spin around and fall on his back. And instantly I went to low ready. And I remember looking to my left and to my right, the same we've done always on the firearms, fire rounds, look to the left, look to the right, get out of the tunnel. And I started the duck walk, as we call it, with low ready, hold my rifle up on him, ready to deliver another shot. Looked over and seen the other SWAT officer, again, doing the exact same thing, low ready, duck walking. And I remember coming up and kicking the gun away from his right hand. And as I kicked it, and it's kind of skittered across the pavement of this county road, I thought, that sounded odd.
Yeah.
And then another officer pulled his shirt up, and there was a bullet hole in him. And that young man looked up and said, thank you. And he shut his eyes, and he died. And at that moment that he shut his eyes and died right there, now, I bailed out of the car without a hat, without a coat, without a gloves. And again, it was around 15 degrees in darkness. We would chase him almost a mile through the fields and onto the roads. And I never, ever felt cold until that moment.
Yeah.
And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't feel my face. I couldn't feel my ears. I couldn't feel my fingers, my toes. I was frozen, and it never even occurred to me till after that. And then I think the hard part is when we walked over and picked the gun up, I was wrong. It was not a 6-inch Dan Wesson 357. It was a Crossman pellet gun.
Yeah.
That looked like a revolver. And at the time, I don't think that's ever bothered me that it was a pellet gun, because it was a revolver in my mind.
I was going to say, I mean, anybody, even a gun guy under those conditions, it was a firearm.
Yeah. And, sometimes perception is more important than reality. And I remember going and sitting in the back of a sheriff's car with the other officer, and the other officer was dry heaving.
Mm-hmm.
And then it hit me, and then he's dry heaving, and I am clenching my sphincter for everything I have, thinking
as we talked about,
I'm going to embarrass myself and make a mess of this fellow officer's vehicle.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you got to get me. And all they did was they transported me back up to the interstate to where I had to get in my own car, which I discovered was almost on empty.
Oh, wow.
And I drove myself to the local sheriff's department where they started the investigation.
Yeah.
And of course, the first place I went to was the latrine, and I didn't think I was ever going to get up from it.
Yeah. So on that drive, and we understand now you shouldn't be on your own, and there was a lot of things done wrong, but it was a different time.
It was.
And we were uneducated. But what was your thoughts driving from the scene? I mean, were you numb? Were you scared? Were you not scared? I mean, what was going through your head? If you can even remember, I'm sure it was probably 100,000 things.
100,000 things at once and numb at the same time.
Yeah.
I think, looking back, I could say it was almost, I would have to say I was almost in shock.
Yeah.
I don't know. At that time, I think it was just too big for me to grasp.
Yeah. So you got to the jail. I arrived about that same time. And when I saw both you guys, and you're both good friends, and we're on a relatively small department, so we know each other's families. We've been to our homes. We've eaten together. We've watched our kids play t-ball together, all that kind of stuff. And I knew instantly, seeing both of you, you looked shell-shocked.
That's a good way to describe it. That's the way I think I was feeling. It was almost a shell shock. It just, did this really happen? Is this a dream? So again, shell shock. That's a great way to describe it.
Yeah. So we all kind of talked, got the gist of what was happening. I had some other duties, but, they basically let you guys cool your heels for a little while. The chief decided the state police would investigate, which was the right call. So the state police detectives started showing up. Your thoughts during that time?
We were sitting on a couch on the hallway, and again, things were different back then. The way they investigated shootings, they did not do it what we would consider properly.
Right.
Again, our admin, this had never occurred to them. They didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
So I was kind of just left alone on a couch, and I remember this young county deputy. He was one that threw out the stop sticks, and he was all excited for his role in this.
Right.
And he's sitting down beside me, and he's like, yeah, when I saw you coming, I threw the sticks out. And I mean, this was the highlight of his young career, and it's so exciting to him. And he just wanted to talk about it so much. And then I remember looking over him and saying, dude, I just killed somebody. Go away.
Wow.
And I think I deflated him.
Yeah. Did he take the hint?
Yeah. And he got up like, oh, sorry. And he, walked away forlorn. I'm like, dude, I don't want to hear your story right now, okay? Go away from me right now. And I remember the state police, they were going to start the investigation. Now we give, 2 sleep cycles, sometimes 3 sleep cycles before you're allowed to even talk to the officer to interview him. This was 3 hours after the shooting. Now, mind you, I'd been up since about 11 a.m. the day before. With a family man working nights, you don't always get 8 hours sleep.
Right.
So I was up all that day. This was on early Sunday morning. I was up all day Saturday, all night Saturday night into Sunday morning to when the shooting occurred. So I'd been up, pushing 24 hours. It was getting that.
And we now understand sleep deprivation is very similar to being intoxicated.
Yes. And I remember them taking them in, and they wanted us to do a breathalyzer first. And so myself and the captain and the other officer got a great idea. Hey, let's call an attorney friend of ours. And so we called a well-known attorney in our area who's also a former police. And he said, look, go ahead and talk to them. Take the breathalyzer. You got anything to worry about? I'm like, no.
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. And he said, but anytime they start becoming accusatory, shut up.
Yeah.
And wait for me. But he said, other than that, if they're just asking questions, go ahead and talk to them. And so I remember them saying, well, will you take a breathalyzer? And I said, yeah, I'll give you breath. I'll give you urine. I even told them, and you have to understand my sense of humor. Thank God it started coming back. I said, I'll even shit in a bucket and give you a stick to pick through it if you want.
That's Tyson.
I'm clean. Whatever you need,
Yeah.
And so, took the breathalyzer. None of us were worried about that. And so we went in and began the conversation, and the state police detectives were very empathetic.
Yeah.
Very professional.
They were very experienced detectives.
Yes, they were. They had handled police action shootings before. Empathetic, very non-accusatory. I can't compliment them high enough. And, they basically, I did the rundown and I remember them asking, when you shot, do you feel you hit him? And I remember saying, on my front sight, I had nothing but, I started saying meat behind my front sight. And I remember saying, the suspect was behind my front sight.
Yeah.
And I tried to catch myself. And, so I went through the interview, and it finally got to the point, this is, I don't know, noon before we were released. I don't even remember. I know I'd been up 24 hours. I remember
my shift was almost over.
Yes.
And, you'd basically worked, a quadruple at that point?
Yeah, at least a triple. And I remember they let us use a phone because, none of us had cell phones in 2004. And I tried calling my wife, and I tried calling her at 6 a.m. and no, she didn't care to get up and answer the phone.
Okay.
Now I'll describe her now as my ex-wife.
Yeah, exactly.
But she didn't care to get up and answer the phone, so I couldn't get a hold to her. So, and I felt desperate, like I needed to talk to some families,
Sure.
And let them know why I'm not home yet.
And I'll stop you there. That's a universal thing. Anybody's been in law enforcement or military, what's the very first thing you try to do when you've been involved in anything is let your wife, spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, mom, dad, whatever, you want to let them know.
Yeah, we'll come back to that on the second shooting because, I called my wife, my second wife on the second, my current wife, not more than probably less than a minute after.
Yeah.
We had cell phones in, but I remember calling my father, God rest his soul, but my father was your typical country conservative, non-emotional man. And I said, Dad, and he goes, yeah. I go, Dad, I'm over in this county. I'm at the sheriff's department. Yeah. What's wrong? I said, Dad, I shot someone. He goes, well, ain't that your job?
Wow.
I'm like,
that's your dad?
No, Dad. And it's really not my job to shoot him. He goes, well, you didn't get shot, did you? I said, no. He goes, well, what's the problem? I think I get some of that dry sense of humor from him. Well, what's the problem? You're alive.
Yeah.
And you know what? You think about it. Well, he's absolutely right. Well, you're alive, aren't you? So what's the big deal? You're alive.
You won the big victory. Yeah.
And after that, I've kept that in my mind. Yeah, you're right. I'm still alive.
Yeah.
But after all these hours of interviewing and all that stuff, basically they said, okay, you're free to go home. Be available if we need to call you. Yeah. And then my chief of police said, yeah, go ahead and go home. Well, I lived about 20 miles away, which meant I was going to drive myself. And if you remember back in the day, we got our gas from the street department
yes.
So we didn't have a gas card or anything like that used to fill up the car. Well, my car's on empty.
Yeah.
And I had to borrow, I think I borrowed $5 from another officer and then drive to the gas station to put gas in my car so I could go home. And, I finally arrived home, and to my wife going, well, where were you?
I've had an interesting day.
Well, and I think she could even tell that I was a little bit shell-shocked.
Yeah.
And, and then explaining to her and to my children what had happened. And, now in our departments, it's mandatory 10-day administrative leave if you're involved in a shooting. This occurred on a Sunday morning. We worked 6 days on, 3 days off. They let me have Sunday night off. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday was my regular scheduled days off. Thursday, they sent me to the shrink. They cleared me. Friday morning, Friday night, I was back at work. So I had less than a week off from the shooting. And so, things have changed. And
talk about talking to the talking doctor.
Well, the problem that I have is that I have a tendency to sometimes be a bit of a smart ass.
Really? First I've heard of this.
And the thing is, I had recovered my sense of humor.
Yeah.
By that Thursday, and they sent me in to it's an organization in Indianapolis, and they do all of our perf testing, your psych, when you come onto the department. And so they sent me there, and I had to take the MMPI, Minnesota multi-phasic, whatever.
I don't even know if they
True or
do
false.
That.
I like pretty flowers, True or false. I love my mother, and all this stuff.
Yeah.
I had to take that again, and what was so funny is then they give you this one sheet. It's got like 20 fill in the blanks. Now, mind you, I'd been a police officer for almost 16 years. And one of the questions, have you ever punched anyone?
Today?
Yes. Have you ever kicked anyone? Yes. Have you ever hit anyone with a nightstick? Yes. And I'm thinking, this is starting to make me look really bad. And then they had that one question, have you ever used a chemical agent on anyone? And this is where my sense of humor kicked in. I wrote, I'm on my 5th can. I actually put that on paper. And then it says, have you ever shot anyone? And I said, and that's what brought us here today. That's exactly what I put on it.
Wow.
And then they take me into this room, and I'm 38 years old. And I had, 14 years as a police officer, 6 years in the military. And they send in this 24-year-old female grad student. And I'm thinking, we have
no connection.
We are worlds apart.
Yeah.
And she starts and she starts talking to me, and then I formulated this joke in my head. And I thought, I wonder if she will allow me to dominate this room. And it truly occurred to me, I'm going to dominate this room. I'm going to mess with her.
Yeah.
And so while she's talking, I just simply interrupted her. I said, excuse me, who are you again? oh, I'm sorry. I'm Dr. such and such. I said, mm-hmm. And I'd let her go on. I go, no, what are your qualifications for speaking with me today?
Did you really?
I did. I mean, it's
a reasonable question.
But I was being a total asshole
sure you
to
were.
her for my own sense of humor.
Yeah, for sport.
Exactly, to humor myself. And she's like, oh, well, I did my undergrad at the University of Colorado and all this stuff. And I said, okay, how many officers involved in police action shootings have you spoke to? Well, I did my master thesis on this. And I said, okay, but that's in college. But now in the real world, how many have you spoke to? Well, you're going to be my first. I'm your first.
Great.
I'm your first. Okay. I just want to make sure we're clear. And I said, now, am I to understand there is no doctor-patient confidentiality? Well, no, Officer Warmoth, because you understand I'm evaluating you and not treating you.
Ah.
I said, okay.
Crucial
then
distinction.
Please understand I may refuse to answer some of your questions because I am looking at a certain amount of civil liability. Please continue. and I'm in back of my mind, I'm screaming, put me in my place.
Yeah.
Say, hey, you arrogant ass. This is my office. And I would have laughed and said, I'm sorry. I was just playing around with you.
Yeah.
Please, again, my apology. If she would have called me out on the joke, I would have been completely fine.
Yeah.
And so while we're talking, and she's asking me the basic questions and all that stuff, I keep seeing her glance up at the clock. Glance up at the clock. Glance up at the clock. I'm like, wait for it. Wait for it. Next time she glanced at the clock, I said, excuse me, is there someplace you need to be? She goes, what? I go, well, you keep looking at the clock. If we need to end this and you have something else to do, we can end this now if you wish.
Yeah.
Oh, no, Officer Warmoth, I am so sorry. No, we're fine. We're fine. And I'm thinking, oh, you wussy. Tell me, put me in my place and I'll respect you. But
you should have reached in your pocket and said, here you go. What is that? It's a clue. You need to get one.
So, the psych exam, it was nothing. I didn't feel like I was in that shell shock anymore. In fact, I got my sense of humor back quite quickly. And I think part of that is because I didn't think we did anything wrong. To me, when he pointed that, which I perceived as a 357, at not only my captain, my OIC, but he was my friend. You know, on a small department, you're all friends. And even when you fight, you're still friends. And I really thought that I was going to see my friend get killed if I didn't do something. So I always felt justified in pressing that trigger.
Yeah.
That never occurred to me that I was in the wrong. So I think that's what helped me cope with that. One thing I really noticed was not my own individual feelings and emotions. It was everyone around me.
Yeah. Treat you differently.
Oh, yes. Yes. You know, I would go in to our local grocery store, back to the meat counter, and get a sandwich all the time. And I knew all the people who worked in there, and it was like being on Cheers. You walk in, everyone yells Norm. Everyone knew me. But now when I walked into public, and I lived in a small town outside a community, and when it hit the newspaper, everyone knows me, and everyone knew what I did.
Yeah.
And myself and the other officer. And so when I go in there, it's almost like, did you hear? He has cancer. And they don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
Everyone just shies away from you. And the other officer involved in the shooting says he, just a few days afterwards, him and his wife walked into the local Pizza Hut, and it was loud, and everyone's having a conversation. He walked in, and it was like a movie. The conversation just died.
Oh, my gosh.
And everyone's looking at him, and he's like, oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
You know, it's that small of a community. And so I felt really weird. The very night when I came home, you know, the shooting occurred on a Sunday morning. That Sunday night, I hear a knock at my door. And I open the door, and it's our local reporter, Maria.
Yeah.
Who's a friend of ours.
Yeah. I went to high school with her.
Yeah. Maria and her husband, John, came to my door. And the first thing out of her mouth is, Tyson, I am not here as a reporter. I'm here as your friend. Are you okay? Maria, I'm fine. Come on in. She goes, well, we baked you cookies. And my daughter, who was 9 at the time, she ran over and she goes, oh, cookies. I go, whoa, whoa, whoa. Those are Daddy's cookies. You didn't shoot anybody. You don't get a cookie. And Maria goes, oh, my God.
Yeah.
I was worried about you. I'm not anymore.
Yeah.
And I laughed. I said, Maria, is this the custom? Shoot somebody
get cookies.
And you give them baked goods? And, you know, and again, this is early on. Remember, we went through the whole 90s where they really tried to pump that warrior ethos into us. And I still subscribe to that to this day. I still buy that and believe that. And I said, Maria, we need to start a new custom. And she goes, what? And I go, you don't make cookies for someone involved in a shooting. You bring them meat.
Red meat.
I said, you bring me steak next time, or at least a pound of bacon. We're meat eaters. We bring us meat. We're warriors, you know. And again, that was less than 24 hours. Again, certain people have a resiliency, and I didn't know if I had that resiliency. No one knows what they're going to do.
Till it happens.
And then I think I surprised myself by having that resiliency that, you know what? I'm standing in my warm house with my wife and my 2 children. Okay? He's not. I'm alive. He's not. Sucks to be you, bud.
Yeah.
You know, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. I win.
Yeah.
I'm standing here. And, it, you know, just simply the fact that when I saw my children, I know, well, this is what it takes to survive in our world sometimes. And no matter what, I go home at night. That's my rule. No matter what, I'm going home tonight. So that helped.
Yeah.
That helped. Now on self-reflection, I really, really beat myself up for years on the shooting, because every time he raised that gun, I raised my rifle, then he would lower it. And at any time, I probably raised it 10 times. And I think I was justified in firing the very first time he raised that. And so I beat myself up for hesitating for years. And I told myself, if I come across another situation, and I never believed if I have another shooting, it was always, and I tell all the young officers, it's never if I have a shooting, if I'm involved in a police action shooting, it's when you are, because you want to say when, because when it happens, you don't want to be like me and absolutely in shock that it's happening.
Yeah.
So I told myself, when I'm in another police action shooting and I know this person needs to be shot, I'm going to shoot him. I'm not going to hesitate. I'm going to do it. No hesitation. No one's getting killed. None of my friends are getting killed on my watch. If it needs done, I'm going to do it without hesitation. I beat myself up for years on that and told myself I will never hesitate again.
Talk real briefly, something you and I have laughed about. You had a couple of reactions to the whole incident that first time.
Well, yeah, I was not even aware of these reactions at the time. And again, I don't think you're always going to be cognizant of everything that's happening to you after a shooting. It's the people around you will be cognizant of it. And I remember having a conversation with my ex-wife that, did I change after the shooting? And she said there were two things that were immediate right after the shooting, and this continued on for nearly a month. And I don't, what was that? She goes, you're so used to working night shifts. She goes, you would go to bed at maybe 7 a.m. after getting home, getting the kids ready, get them on the bus, while she was getting ready for work. And then I'd always be up before the kids got home. She says you would go to sleep at 7 a.m. and then you were out like a light. And then some nights at 7:30 p.m., I would send the children in to wake you because you had been asleep the entire time. So it seemed like for weeks after, I was zonking out for 10 to 12 hours a day. And the other curious thing she said, and when you weren't sleeping, all you wanted to do was have sex. She says, your libido kicked into overdrive. You were either asleep or you were horny.
Yeah.
And so I didn't realize that at the time. I just always thought I was always horny, a young man, but
we've laughed about it that I guess your inner Viking kicked in.
Inner Viking, it must be it. I'd be curious. I never talked to a shrink about my libido or my need for sleep. So, I'd be curious to see where that came from.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting side effect.
Yeah. But it didn't cause you any trouble, did it?
No, not, well, caused maybe some frustration on my part, but, no trouble.
Yeah. Well, at the end of that question, and to wrap this particular incident up, was there anything that you still feel unsure about, or is this whole incident essentially put away in your mind? Is there anything that still you just wonder about?
I still have some sort of physical reaction. Now, we pass this county road. When my wife and I are out on the motorcycle, we're avid motorcyclists, and we'll travel to the community over for dinner a lot of times, and we'll go straight down the highway and past the county road where this all occurred. We passed the field that we chased the individual across, and I did not realize it until my wife brought it up, is that we would go down the highway, and she'd always notice on the motorcycle how it always looked to the left towards the interstate. And she goes, and then when we pass this road, you'd always look to the right and look down that road, and you always let out a big sigh. And I said, I do? Yeah. She goes, what's up with that? And she goes, it happens every time. And that's when I point out to her, well, that's where the shooting happened. So I think and I've only been back there one time. I took my wife there in daylight, of course, and showed her basically where all the players were standing at the time. And I have put it all behind me. I think that first shooting's in the books. It's filed away. There is still a little bit of residual guilt that I hesitated so much.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's guilt or maybe even it's ego. Why did I hesitate so much to do that, to do my job?
Yeah.
Why did I hesitate? And thank God no one was killed.
Yeah.
And yes, it's horrible that it was a Crossman pellet gun, but I still thank God, it wasn't a real gun.
Have you talked to any of the other guys? And I won't say the name of our friend that also pulled the trigger, but does he feel the same way about that? Because both of you held your fire and you were totally justified at any point during that.
Here's the odd thing. He and I have never sat down and discussed it.
Really?
Never have. I guess it's, and back then the department, it's again, it's not the way it is today. Things were treated differently. No, back then in the department, it was not even to be discussed.
Right.
They didn't want to talk about it. There was no debrief or anything like that. There was no peer support team.
Yeah.
All these things we have nowadays.
It was suck it up, buttercup, and get back.
Be a good
on the
soldier.
Horse. Yeah.
Get back up on your feet. Don't be a pussy.
Yeah.
And that's the way the department handled it.
Yeah.
And
law enforcement in general, I think, handled it.
I think so. And that's just the way we were back then. John Wayne never cried. You won't either. And it's like that. Well, a good friend of ours always says, "Do you remember that movie when John Wayne had PTSD?" And you said, "Well, no, it's because John Wayne never had PTSD."
Exactly.
And that, unfortunately, was the environment that we were brought up in law enforcement. We both started our career in the 80s, in the end of the 80s. And so we were still working with those cops that started their careers in the 60s.
Yeah.
And no. You don't cry.
Yeah.
There's no crying in law enforcement. So,
exactly.
So it was a different time then. And you did have to suck it up because, you know what? Friday, you're going back to work on nights.
Yeah.
And you better realize it might happen again.
Well, being a writer, a communicator, and also being on SWAT, and I remember you and I, like I said, had a lot of conversations. I've talked to our friend who was also there and shot, and I always got the feeling that both you guys are like, this is different. Why do you want to talk about it? Because I really wanted to know all these details, and I tried to be, give you your space, but I feel like both you guys felt better for kind of talking to one of your peers about it. Was that true, or was that me trying to? No,
I think you have to tell your story. I mean, you can't hold it all in. And, I think it's very therapeutic to tell the story. And, again, as I spoke to you this morning when I first arrived here, I said, I woke up with a little anxiety that I'm going to be going back to those dark places in my mind. But I think it is very therapeutic to go ahead and tell the story again and again and again, because at least you're not holding it in, you're getting it out.
Yeah. Did many of the guys want to talk to you about it?
I think police officers they don't want to cross that line. With an officer involved shooting, they don't want to come to him and say, "Hey, tell me what it was like."
Yeah.
What'd you feel? They don't want to do that. I don't know if they're afraid or they're being respectful of you.
Or all of the above. It's just that uncomfortable thing.
It's very uncomfortable for another officer to approach another officer and say, "Hey, so you were in shooting.
Yeah.
So how was it, man?"
Yeah.
And you're like, and I think
it's not like TV. We're not all high-fiving in the locker room.
Oh, absolutely not. No, again, that was like almost the whole shooting was treated like a dirty secret.
Yeah.
And no one wanted to bring it up. We're lucky. We live in a very tight-knit, conservative community who support their police.
Yeah.
Now, this young man that got shot had his family. And if you remember, cars were driving by with all his friends where they would write with shoe polish on One Love and FLPD and all this stuff. And they were taking any time they could to yell at the police officers, call them names, except for me and the other officer involved. I remember pulling up at an intersection and they were right beside me. And I'm thinking they're going to start yelling and everything. No. They
looked straight ahead.
Looked straight ahead. And I think what does help is that you're going back to work with a bunch of, well, as I describe police officers, type A assholes. I love them. I've been one for my life, and I love when people say, "I don't like cops." I go, "Oh God, me either." They're type A assholes, But have that sense of humor. We always ate at the same truck stop. And then when we go up to pay our bill, there is a jar. They're collecting money for the funeral of this young man, shot by the police. It had on there, and our one of our captains, who's since passed, he starts laughing. He goes, "You know what I ought to do? Because I ought to drop a .223 round in there."
Oh my gosh!
Oh, please don't do that.
Don't
do that. But there's that kind of sense of humor. I think kind of helps buoy you, helps pick you up.
Oh, absolutely.
But we'd never ask.
Yeah.
We would never ask for that. But they're there. They were there.
Well, again, we try to keep these, in these interviews in bite-sized chunks. We've covered your first shooting. We're going to talk in the next episode about your your second shooting. Well, let's hope it's your last shooting. But it was about as different night and day as they could be. And this one's still kind of fresh.
4 years.
Yeah. The scab's there, but it's not completely crusted over. So I appreciate you talking to me about this. I know it's hard for you. It's hard for me sometimes, when I see that faraway look in your eye, and I know that you're reliving certain things. But I do think this is the kind of stuff, it's good to tell your story, and I hope it will help folks that have either been there or may someday be there. So I appreciate that. And we will conclude this interview in our next episode of the Guns Magazine podcast.
Thank you, Brent.
I hope my chat with Tyson Warmoth gave you a glimpse at what happens both inside your head and around you after a shooting. Make sure you check out our next episode, which I think is even more compelling. And with that, I hope you're enjoying the Guns Magazine podcast. Guns Magazine was first on the newsstand, and today we're bringing you the most interesting chats in the gun world. If you've got any questions or comments about the show, please email me. That's editor@gunsmagazine.com. Make sure you subscribe to us on your favorite podcast directory, YouTube, and of course at gunsmagazine.com. And while you're online, don't forget to check out our great sister publications, American Handgunner Magazine at AmericanHandgunner.com, AmericanCop.com, and our numerous special editions available on our websites. Most of all, when you're online, I'd also appreciate it if you'd share a favorite episode or some kind words on your own social media. Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. For the entire staff at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat. Now get out there and get shooting.